Hey there, Jim Gavigan again today with Lance Fountain. And really, we want to build on what we talked about last time, where today we're going to talk more about what the factory of the future looks like. We've kind of talked about a little bit of the history of manufacturing and how we got to where we were or where we are today. But today it's more starting to look at the future and see what the future holds. So, Lance, I'm excited about this one. Why don't you get us kicked off? Kind of what our themes
Me,
are for the day.
me as well, Jim. Excited about it. And as we think about this idea, what does the future look like? I think we first have to take a step back and say, what outcomes are we trying to achieve, right? So we kind of talked a little bit about the history, including current challenges we face in manufacturing today.
Mm-hmm.
But now, what does tomorrow need to be like to address some of those challenges? What does tomorrow need to be like to make large, medium, small companies successful? And so, I was going to kick off and talk about some of those concepts, and I'll call those transformational concepts, right? Big picture stuff that can't be done in a day or a week or several months. This is going to be a multiple year journey, but you
Yep.
always have to have the end in mind.
Yep.
So, I call those the transformation themes. Hey, how is manufacturing going to transform in the coming years?
Yep.
So I really see three significant transformation themes. One is what I would call the factory of the future. And I'll start by saying not all those concepts are new, right? The factory of the future, that journey's been going on for years. If you think about Industry 3.0 and adopting automation, we've been doing that for a number of years. But the journey continues, and it continues to evolve how we think about that factory of the future. So, what are the big objectives we're trying to achieve? And we talked about this last time, but we have a pretty significant labor risk out there. Labor, supply
Pretty
chain,
significant. Yeah.
inflation.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. And,
It's
you
big.
know, so what do? You step back and you can kind of hope it'll go away and we'll get back to how things used to be. And you and I talked about that last time. I
Probably
don't
not.
think that's going to happen.
No.
So now you think about, you know, what do we have to do differently with labor? And, you know, and that obviously will have impact on costs, it'll have impact on safety. But it's that big picture of what does a site look like? What does a manufacturing facility look like? How is it organized? That's this idea of the factory of the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the major
For sure.
transformations for sure. Yep. The second one kind of goes hand in hand with that factory of the future. Some people would even call it part of the factory of the future, but I'll frame it a bit differently. And that's the idea of what can we do from a remote operations standpoint. So it's really about remote operations concepts. What do you have to do physically on site versus what can you do remotely?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, why is that important? Because I think as we are looking for different types of talent and capabilities, more of these talent and capabilities might be more readily available in certain specific regions or parts of the country, right?
Correct. Yep.
And you're going to want to be able to attract the right labor. So what can we do remotely? Again, there's even safety reasons for that. You don't always want people walking around the plant all the time. So it's not all just about the people side. It's also about safety side. It's also about cost side. And then how do we leverage some of those capabilities? So when you get into medium, large companies, there is an intention to take our best subject matter experts and leverage them better. Uh, maybe have a follow the sun strategy. So they're supporting sites across the
Right.
globe. And, where do you put them? Is it virtual? Is it physical? How do they work together? It's probably more than one. How do we better manage redundancy? It's all those concepts around what can we do from a remote operation standpoint. And by the way, some industries have already gone pretty far down this path, right? It's not a new concept,
Yeah, for sure.
but I think there is more opportunity there, and
Yeah.
I think that's going to be
Especially
part of
like if you look at the power industry and oil and gas. I think
it.
both.
Yeah,
Like the
metals and
upstream,
mining.
midstream. Yeah, metals and mining. Another one. Some of the typical ones we're not seeing that in are food, paper, chemicals. A lot of the industries we work in, ironically. But I think the others have been kind of forced that way.
Yeah, and I'll say it this way, not as much. I think they've done pockets of it.
Right.
But again, if you think really future, where will it go? And I would even challenge, even in these industries that are more mature, like metals and mining or oil and gas, there's more steps they can take. I would,
For sure.
if you ask them, I think they would tell you they believe they can take it further in time. It's just how do we mature and get better at it?
Yep.
So that's the second transformation theme. The third transformation theme is really all about the customer and the customer supply chain. What are their expectations? And as we talked about in our last discussion, Jim, it's evolving very, very rapidly.
For sure.
They expect full transparency. They want to buy local. They want to. They care about things like the planet and climate change, and as a result, I think their behaviors are being driven accordingly. So I think all companies are going to have to provide more transparency, more data, better information, not only to their customers and suppliers, but even to their business itself, as they continue to have to make tough decisions about that supply chain and how they move forward.
Yep.
So the whole digital supply chain, I think, is another transformation focus area that companies will be honing in on.
100%.
Well,
Yep.
so I think those are the big transformation themes, Jim.
Yep.
And where I thought we'd go next is, you don't transform in a day, as I said earlier, or a week or a month. This is a multi-year journey, but you can get lost on that journey too. What I mean by that is if you're doing hundreds and thousands of projects and you aren't connecting them to this transformational outcome, then it's just another project and you lose sight of that connectivity and you lose sight of the journey. So the advantage of defining the transformation themes and defining what I'll call building blocks to achieve them is all about keeping your eye on the ball and understanding the progression of this journey and how you mature. Because any one project might be a little change, right? But transformation's a big change. And, you probably have to hit critical mass with small changes before you make the bigger changes. And even your bigger changes might come in multiple steps. So again, it's keeping the journey connected, keeping the projects we do today connected to the desired outcomes 3 to 5 years from now, what we're calling our target transformation state.
So let me stop you for a second. I was writing this down so I didn't miss it. So I agree with you. So, we kind of know like the typical corporate environment right now, right, is focused on quarterly earnings, this quarter, next quarter, and that's kind of about it. A lot of shifting, moving around. Like, our team talked yesterday. It seems like a lot of reorganizations. Matter of fact, your old companies, went through a pretty good sized reorganization. So how do you stay focused on those long-term and the building blocks when people are moving in and out at a high level? So maybe the priorities kind of change. So how does a company do that?
So I think you have to have a well-articulated, clearly defined vision and strategy of what you're trying to accomplish. And you have to get the company as a whole behind that. That means your executive leaders all the way down to your shop floor.
Right, everybody's got
all levels of persona. And then that becomes the glue that holds everybody together, right? We're all buying into this vision of the future. And yes, you're going to have pressures in the short term. You're going to have changes in the organization and people. But ultimately, you're always keeping your eye on that ball. And things can slow down during tough times. They can speed up during good times, or vice versa. I've seen both strategies play out.
Right.
But at the end of the day, just make sure you recognize where you are in the journey and how the journey is progressing. Don't lose sight of that. And it's easy to lose sight of it. If you start thinking about digital transformation, industrial transformation as 1,000 projects, and you forget about the big picture you're trying to accomplish, then I think you'll get lost in 1,000 projects, but you'll never keep it connected to something bigger. So, I think of the building blocks as a way to organize projects. And again, all those projects are little changes, and I'm not taking anything away from those small changes. But again,
it just has to fit in a bigger picture is what you're saying.
Yeah, eventually, yes, the bigger picture. Eventually, you've got to say, all right, when am I ready for bigger change? And you will get there, but you won't if you take your eye off the ball and you're just approaching it as 1,000 independent projects. Gotcha. I think that's the fear.
That's good advice.
So It's always a challenge, though, right? It's always a challenge because things change rapidly. Again, the short-term, uh, quarter-by-quarter focus you talk about, it's not going to go away. But
No.
I think leaders have to be responsible enough to keep the organization focused not only on the short term but the long term. And sometimes, unfortunately, that does get lost.
I think that's going to be one of the big challenges in corporate, certainly in North America, corporate America, companies that are publicly traded. That's going to be a very difficult thing because stockholders and the Wall Street doesn't necessarily want to hear that. They do, but they really are focused on the bottom line, or the top line, right? And that's going to be a hard thing to stay focused on. That's why I wanted some commentary around that. Just knowing what
Yeah.
I know about how I've seen organizations play things out.
Yeah.
So
And you're right. They do in words, right? No one's going to care. No one's going to say they don't care about the long-term outcomes and objectives. Everybody does. Sometimes actions speak louder than words, and I think it takes real
100%,
leaders
100%.
to keep the short term connected to the long term and know when, hey, you're going too far to achieve a short term objective and taking your eye off the long term. And
Yep.
again, it's a fine line. I understand. A lot of especially public companies have a lot of pressure quarter by quarter. But again, the best leaders, I think, will find a way to keep those two things connected and not lose sight of the long term future as well.
Yep.
And look, we're going to face disruption. We've already talked about it. We're going to face disruption, and leaders have to be responsible for that, right? You
Yep.
can't just kicking the can down the road and hoping that it's going to get better. You're going to have to take ownership for the change that's coming.
100%. 100%. So the next thing you have on your list here, is automated and improved measurement.
Yeah. So let's step back a bit. So we
Okay.
we talked about the three transformation themes.
Okay.
So now what I think is worthwhile is to dig into each one of those transformation themes and say, hey, what are the types of building blocks? So remember, a
Gotcha.
building block
Yep.
is just a category of projects. Think of it that way. What are the types of projects or the building blocks we need to start to drive success to longer term transformation objectives related to each of the transformation themes? So the first one we'll hone in on will be the factory of the future. So very specifically, what are the building block
Right.
project types we need to do to make factory of the future transformation possible? So I've really thought about it as five building blocks or types of project groups we would pursue with this factory of the future. Some of them are quite straightforward and you'll readily recognize them.
Mm-hmm.
Others, maybe not so much. So factory
Yep.
of the future, let's get started. The first one I had, as you said, is automated and improved
Sorry, got
measurement.
ahead of you there.
No worries. I thought it was good just to frame it first.
Yep.
So automated and improved measurement, what does that mean? So if you think about measurement on the shop floor today, we have a lot of process measurement, a lot of quality measurement. Some of it is done with instrumentation, some of it isn't. What you're seeing with technology capabilities is the ability to measure a lot more and measure a lot more in real time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So today, take quality as an example, critical to quality, we're taking sample measurements. They're not 100%. They're in most cases, they're a single sample that is a representation of what's being produced on the line. And we might do some quality analysis, and sometimes we write things down, just like you're writing now, Jim.
Yep. I'm taking notes here.
Sometimes we write things down. Sometimes it's automatically collected digitally. Sometimes we use a tablet. But how do we bring more digital to that process? And how do we maybe measure it closer to real time? So types of technology that play in this space, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, not only traditional instrumentation, but things like vision systems,
Yep.
right? Things like inline process analytical tools, where now we're taking things that might have been sampling in the past, we're measuring them real time 100%, and we're digitizing all the data related to that. Now, how does that change things? Well, you're taking a repetitive, in many cases, a dull job, right? We're automating it. We're mitigating some of the labor risk, right, associated with it. We're probably getting better accuracy, better measurement, right? So again, not only better performance, but we're tackling some of the labor challenges that we either are facing or will be facing on the shop floor.
So here's what I wrote down. So real world example, just talked about it yesterday with a customer. We were actually comparing lab measurements to the online analyzers because they have redundancy in some places. And even with the instrumentation, sometimes like it gets out of calibration, or the humans like make a mistake, right? And there's a delta, right? So we're seeing that in some places, but one of those measurements is like a really key measurement, for this company. And the online analyzer kind of went crazy, quote unquote, a few weeks ago while I was on site actually. And they ended up having an environmental release because of it, because the process thought one thing based on what the online analyzer was telling you, and the process reacted to that, and it wasn't true, right? So then they had an environmental release, and it wasn't bad or anything. It wasn't like this huge thing, but one of the things that it did was put a lot more pressure on good measurements. And then and one of the things that I remember hearing at the site was they were really struggling to get good E&I people, good people who understand electrical and instrumentation. If we're going to put a lot more instrumentation in, because you and I both know places that they're going to put a ton more instrumentation in, we're going to have people to, to maintain it, calibrate it, make sure it's in good working order. Otherwise, we're really no better off in some cases. So how do we address some of those?
Yes,
because I agree with you on everything you said. Is like, but then I just had this slap me in the face in the last few weeks. I'm like, yeah, because I'm a big proponent.
And we talked about this in our last call, but I'll bring it up again.
Yep.
When we talk about the workforce of tomorrow, so we talk about the factory of the future and the workforce of tomorrow, the assumption sometimes people have is, oh, we're just going to reduce numbers, and it's more than that. It's different skill sets. If you are going to become a digital company in the future, you can't assume that all of your engineers, all of your OT resources, your IT resources, it's going to stay flat, right? If you're investing in digital, part of that is people, to your point, right? The people who calibrate, the people who monitor, right? The people who maintain. So that's a big part of it. It's not a one for one, I don't think, but you're going to have to build capability and talent that you don't currently have, right? That's part of this equation as well.
I think some of these factories, they're still in some smaller towns, right? Is partner with a local community college and get people trained up. Exactly. Do something, right? Because you're going to have a conduit to bring people in who can maintain. Because if you're going to run a factory of the future, you're going to need people to maintain the equipment. And we'll get into this, but I don't think the robots are going to maintain themselves, or the instrumentation is going to maintain itself in a lot of cases. Some cases maybe, but some cases not.
Certainly not yet. Right. And again,
we're away from that.
We talk about transformation. What transformation means 5 years from now will probably be different than what it means today. And again, this is that journey. This is, again, why we put transformation on the table and we revisit it. It's not a static destination. It's going to change. It's going to evolve.
And I just think the people that are listening need to think, well, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's go put some more instrumentation in. Well, you have to have a plan. Like, you have to think about the whole picture. Just like you're advocating, saying, hey, because I'm guilty, right? Is I've been focusing on the projects, and I'm not necessarily, and maybe just our role so far with customers has not really been that, overlying big picture. We don't necessarily get asked to do that. We're more on the execution side. So kind of hearing you talk about it, given your experience, gives me a little bit different picture. And then I'm kind of like, but then something like this, I did see a bigger picture here. So I think it kind of helps. Both of our experiences are a little bit different. So anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other side to think about here too, yes, people, but then sometimes you'll need redundant instrumentation. You'll need to validate some data. You'll need to calibrate, right? These are things that come with it. So great call out on the people side, right? This is not just about eliminating jobs. Sometimes it's different capabilities, different skill sets. Sometimes it's about an evolving workforce and how we meet job needs for the future, right? I really do believe as we have uh, more and more young people in the country that are using, Androids and iPhones and
Yeah.
doing digital every day, they're not going to want to come and do a very dull manual job, and so
Right.
their expectations are going to change. And
Already
we can
has.
pretend that's not true,
Already
but it
has.
is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. So good discussion. So the next building block. So automated and improved measurement, number one. Number two is what I'll call physical task automation. By the way, this one is not new at all. We've been
No.
doing this for the last 30, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
What's different is the technology capabilities keep evolving.
Yeah.
And there's more and more opportunities to automate physical tasks, right? That can be robotics, but it can also be things like drones and AGVs and all these other new technologies that are popping up that are making some of what not used to be possible. And even things like cobots, where we're
Right.
taking ergonomic strain off an employee. And I've worked in places where some of those jobs are very physical and manual,
Right.
and you just, quite frankly, when you get my age, it's harder to do that
Yeah.
job,
You're
right?
old. Yeah.
I am getting there, that's for sure. And it's harder to do that job. But like I said,
100%.
there are ways we address that. There are ways we make the job safer, easier, and that's part of this as well. So it's not always just complete physical automation, but there are varying degrees. Inspection is another thing.
Yeah. I mean, you're
Like
seeing, I see the power company like flying drones inspecting lines, right?
pipelines. That's
Yeah.
happening all the time.
Pipelines. Yep. I mean, we see that. I mean, seeing some of those little Boston Dynamics robots, I mean, you think about that, they can climb stairs now. I mean,
Yeah, they
you
don't
think,
just dance,
yeah,
right?
you think about doing physical inspections, infrared, any kind of visual inspection, that we're doing, maybe even in a tough environment, those can potentially do those better, than
And
even we can, quicker.
absolutely a,
So,
there's absolutely a safety element to that as well, too.
yeah,
That you want to make sure we call out here because it's critical.
yep, yep. Okay.
The third one, again, not new. I'll call it advanced process control. So obviously we've done process control for a long time. We've done alarming to interact with the operators, but that's all evolving. Now with some advanced capabilities, we can run analytics to do advanced process control. We
Mm-hmm.
can do model predictive control. So again, not all new, but the capabilities have evolved. And why is that important? At the end of the day, it should help us achieve better optimization of the process, but also less operator interaction, right? They can focus on the things that are highest priority and mean the most, and not constantly get distracted with alarms or maybe
Yeah.
control decisions that can be automated. So again, very similar to physical task automation, it's an evolving capability, and we should be good at the basics first, but those basics are evolving and becoming quite the norm for good process control, um, you know, process and procedures.
Yeah, what's interesting, when you wrote that, I thought about an example I just saw in the last few weeks where, I can't really talk about like what industry or any of that, but one of the things that they had talked about was, to your point, less operator engagement or need for, operator engagement. But also, this was something that just kind of floored me, and I didn't really think about it. But you think about how we've done a lot of control in the past is we're trying to keep it between the ditches, right? Keep it between the lines, like keep between the upper and lower limits, and keep it in a safe operating range where everything runs well, right? Um, and these guys were actually like, no, what we're actually trying to do is push to constraints. We have constraints. Let's bump up against that constraint and see if we can get past it. And then we'll hit a different constraint. And that was really the goal of the advanced process control. And what was really interesting, I asked them like, what was the operator adoption, and they said that, well, we have like one operator's been here like 20 years, one that's been here like 8 or 9, and then two that have been here like 2 or 3. And I said, well, what do they think? And they said, ironically enough, the one that's here 20 years actually wants it on all the time because he's seen it work. And he's like, this takes the load off of me and I can go focus on other things, to your point. The 2-year operators, you would think they'd be like, yeah, please have this on because then I don't have to think. They're like, well, if you want it on, great. If you don't, great. No big deal. And then the one that was like 8 or 9 years was kind of the same way. It was really strange. Like, because usually the 20-year was like, nope, I don't want any of that stuff, right? Don't do that to me. But this person was like, I want that. It's actually really good. It helps me do my job better. But one of those goals was more consistency between operators. So
There's
really
probably some
interesting.
dependency on the culture there too. The culture at the facility, the culture at the company.
I think it was just this individual person because
And
I
even
was
that,
actually stunned knowing the culture. I was actually stunned to hear that, to be honest. So
yeah.
it's
The
pretty
other thing I'm
interesting.
not sure I noted, but the other thing to think about with process control is start up and shut down too. How
Mm-hmm.
do I safely start up, safely shut down, but also to your point about pushing the constraints, right? How do I get the optimal performance quicker, right?
Exactly,
Very important.
and one of theirs was handling upset conditions better,
Yeah.
right? Is if I have an upset condition, how do I get back to running the way I need to run as quickly as possible? And one of their, I think they were looking at it, before it would take like 6 or 7 hours to do it, and now it's like maybe within an hour, maybe two, right? That's a big number, right? That's
It is.
that's that's a big number, and like some of the friends of ours at Lytics, just talked on a Aviva webinar the other day with IGI Wax, and same thing was like, making off spec product for so long. Now I think it was like 22 hours down to like 5 or something along those lines. It was a big number, and literally I think it was Patty Sullivan asked again, like, wait, let me make sure I get these numbers right, and I think I heard that correctly, but it was this massive, time difference in running off spec to on spec product because they had better intelligence around what was going on. So I thought it was a great story. Just same thing you were just talking about.
We talk about it a lot in the world of OE, right? Defect or excursion, and how do you minimize impact? The whole goal there is you're not going to always be able to completely prevent all defects or excursions,
Correct.
but how do we minimize the impact?
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
How do we minimize the impact?
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
So definitely the game is changing there.
Yep.
So the first three are all about, technology to improve process, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mitigate risk, make make for less stress on people, less strenuous activities for people,
Yep.
make their jobs a bit easier from an automation standpoint. The next two I'm going to talk about are all about their experience. When I say there, I mean the people on the shop floor, their experience. That also has to be called out as part of this factory of the future. So we might envision one day of having a complete lights out plant. But realistically, for our industries where we are today, if you think 5 or 10 years from now, you're probably still looking at people in the plants operating the plants.
100%.
For sure.
In most cases, yeah.
And what we have to do as part of the factory of the future is think about how do we make their jobs easier from every aspect of what they do, right? Not just the physical process, the process optimization, but every aspect. That could be manual data entry. That could be decision support. That could be administrative type work. If you're a supervisor in one of these plants, I think we talked about this before, the supervisor role is a very challenging role. It's not a very sought after role,
Yeah.
and it's getting harder to find those people.
Yes.
But that is not always a fun job to do. So how do we make that job easier, more satisfying, less stressful, right? Because it's very important. So that whole people experience has got to be part of this factory of the future as well. So we can think about it from an operator perspective and how we make them more effective, whether it be decisions, whether it be early indication, early warning of what's about to come, getting data in their hands, getting it to be more actionable,
Yep.
and supporting them. And that might even be supporting them with digital tools, right?
For sure. Matter of fact, I just did a short video when I was in Memphis a couple weeks back and talked about that. Like, are we looking past the operator a little bit? You know, we're not really focusing. I know we're guilty, right? If we focus our tools at the supervisors, engineers, people like that, but we kind of leaving the operators behind. And Keith Alderton, one of our former colleagues at OSISoft, said, "Well, Jim, you got to remember something. The operators aren't the ones with the checkbook. They're not buying anything. So a lot of times their needs kind of get pushed down the stack. I think they need to get pushed up the stack." And
Agreed.
There's a display that I built. It was a lime kiln potential display, and it was just an XY plot. Here's an operating range where you want to be. And then I had taken a guy's PowerPoint and just literally made it, made it like a multi-state, big multi-state. It was like, okay, if you want to turn this knob for this long, here's the effect it's going to have on the rest of the lime kiln, right? So the idea is if you want to get back in the right operating range, the right things will light up and say, okay, here are the things that you can do, and here's what effect it has on the process. And really interesting, I mean, several people have really responded well to that. It's almost this, as they call it, visual trouble cause correction, kind of a thing. I think we have to be better at giving the operator better tools. Like, here's something that, I was talking to a guy at a paper mill lime kiln. He was talking about these cloths, and there was something that wasn't happening properly, like the mud on the cloths didn't look right. Well, how does a young operator know the difference? Maybe we give them a YouTube video kind of a thing, right? They go click on it, say, okay, that's what it looks like when it's good. That's what it looks like when it's bad. Or heaven forbid, let's have pervasive wireless in the field. They walk out and they say, okay, here's what good looks like. Here's what bad looks like. What do I have? Right? And then there's okay, if you see bad, here's what needs to happen. And it's just visual. It's you don't have to rely so much on tribal knowledge at that point.
Operators want to do a good job. Inherently, they want to do their job well.
How many people come in and say, I really want to do a crappy job today? I don't think it's that many people.
Either do I. It's just knowing what good looks like, to your point, right? Knowing what good looks like.
So I think that's an important thing.
Operator focus is certainly one, but I also want to call separately the supervisor experience, because I've been in plants where supervisors are tracking hours or keeping track of training. It's just manual data entry, manual knowledge, and then maybe one of the most frustrating things for them is when business and operational leadership come to the plant and throw more at them. Well, I need more reports. I need more data, and they kind of get dumped on in this storyline. And so how do we make their jobs easier? I will tell you, I really believe supervisors, plant managers are probably the most important jobs in manufacturing and industry. And I think they don't always get treated well, or their issues don't always get recognized. That needs to change.
I agree.
And so a focus on what do we do to make their jobs easier is a key part of this. That goes well beyond the first three building blocks of advanced and automated measurement, physical task automation, and advanced process control. It's more than just that. Yeah. And we have to remember that in this factory of the future focus.
Yep.
So again, all the projects we do at a site, they can kind of fit into one of these buckets. And as you'll see, as we talk about the next transformation theme, these transformation themes are also connected, and we'll talk about that a bit as we move forward. Any other comments you want to add on Factory of the Future, Jim? Or
no, I'd like to try to comment as we're going along while I think about it. And sometimes when I'm like, okay, you still got a couple minutes, I want to make sure I don't forget it. I'll just write it down, because I don't want to interrupt some of the thoughts you have, but then I kind of want to add some of my own color there at the end on experiences, right? So no, let's keep moving. It's really good.
All right, next transformation theme is what I'll call remote operations concepts or capabilities. Call it what you will. Again, the whole idea is not new. Many industries have been doing it for years. Some are more mature than others. But where do we take this? And again, as I think about that transformation theme, which goes hand in hand with the Factory of the Future, how do we start to redesign our organization within a company? How do we start to redesign the services we utilize from partners, right? It's all part of this remote operations concept. And what are some of the building blocks within remote operations? Well, the first one's critically important. And it will also tie to our third transformation theme, but I'll call it out. And that is really standardized manufacturing data, or what I'll call data twins.
And this is
Now,
different from digital twin, so I'm curious to hear because I was just reading this again. I'm like, this isn't where I was expecting you to go. So continue.
in my mind, the difference, and this is an ongoing argument, I would say. In my mind, the difference between a data twin and a digital twin is more of a representation of a process, an outcome. A
Mm-hmm.
data twin is really how we put data together, whether it be a calculation, whether it be a KPI, whether it be real time, whether it be shift summary, hour summary, shift summary, day summary, week summary, month summary. It's how we put that data together, the rules we use to put the data together. And it might seem like a slight nuance, but I think it's more than that because your data twin becomes the language for your manufacturing process or for your company, right? And a lot of people take this the wrong way. You don't need to standardize every piece of data you ever have. That's not what we're saying here.
All right.
What we're saying here is establish a set of data that you call standard or you call a standard for your business, your operations, and then let that evolve as it may be. You may accentuate that and add more data to it. You may decide it's too much, you want to take some away. But you got to agree on those,
Yeah.
that foundation data layer. And why? Well, if you're operating across a fleet of assets, which is what we do in this remote operations concept, right? We have a fleet of like assets. If we operate across those assets, you got to have a way to benchmark baseline performance. You got to know what good looks like. And that's what we're trying to do here is really drive that standardization, define best in class, define best in plant, set targets, and drive continuous improvement. But you need the data to do that
Yeah, and
and do it well.
I literally just did a video right before, well, I shot it several weeks ago, but I just released it right before we got on here, and I formulated that plants, and this was 3 years ago, plants in 10 years won't be running as good as they are today, despite all the great technology. And a lot of it's because we don't know what good looks like, and I think what you're saying speaks to that. Like, do we really know? Do we have the data to say this is what good actually looks like, for our plant? So,
I'll let a cat out of the bag here, and I'm not going to tell you the company, right? But there was a large company I was working with that measured process efficiency. And as we were going down this data twin path, we asked a really simple question, and that was, how do you calculate that efficiency? And we had 20 plus plants, and we had 20 plus different answers. How can you compare if you aren't even calculating or putting it together in the same way?
Yeah.
So it's important. And look at this whole idea of data twin has to evolve. I want to be very clear about that because it scares people. Because we have a lot of data in plants. We can have hundreds of thousands to millions of data tags in a plant,
Mm-hmm.
right? It scares people. But you got to start and continuously improve, just like you do, with almost everything you pursue, every opportunity you pursue in a large plant. It's continuous improvement, right?
Yep.
Every opportunity or challenge. So you have to approach it the same way. It doesn't have to be perfect,
Yep.
but lay groundwork. And I think what you'll find is over time, you'll just want to get better. You'll never be best. You'll never be perfect. You just want to get better. And that's what this pursuit is all about. But you got to start with data. Just like you would with any other lean process or OpEx process, you want to drive continuous improvement, but you got to have a start. And data twin is no different. You got to be able to start and decide what are your key metrics, common metrics going to be.
Yep.
And that's exciting, I think. So that's number one. That's the first building block. And every company I've ever worked for either has done or is doing something in this space still today because they're improving. They're just driving those
For sure.
next steps.
Yeah. 100%.
Okay. The second one I'll highlight is the ability, once you have standard data, the ability to take subject matter experts within that process and scale and leverage them. You might do that virtually, you might do it physically, you might do it follow the sun, where you're actually covering multiple time zones. There's all kinds of ways you can approach this. But how do you bring experts together, leverage your best experts to support optimization of processes across the fleet? And there's a whole conversation we can have around this.
Oh, yeah.
Because it doesn't mean it's all internal to any one company, right?
Correct.
This is where the word services come in and the word intellectual property comes in. If it's your intellectual property as a company, you probably ought to have it in-house. If it's not, however, can you get good services from the outside?
Yeah.
I'll give you a highlighted example here. Utilities. Every manufacturing organization I know has some form of utilities. Steam,
package
air.
boiler, air, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Electricity, yeah.
Is that something that should be managed internally? Maybe.
Yeah.
But maybe it becomes a service, because when things go bad in the plant, the thing that'll always be most important is where's your IP. So, if you're accountable for process management at a plant, you're going to care about your process. Things like utilities, even though they're critical, they'll become secondary priority, right? So understanding your IP, what's most important to you, and then thinking about, not making any hard decisions, but thinking about where is it most appropriate to look for or embrace services. And that's an evolving landscape, but there are a lot of companies out there that are starting to recognize the value of providing services and receiving services in this manner.
Yeah, 100%. Here's one that I kind of thought about, and I just want to run this by you, is, also in my video today, I talk about not having the experts that we're used to seeing. We're not going to have those 20, 25, 30-year people that we can lean on. Not nearly as much anyway. How do we address that? And is this a tool maybe to retain some of that talent? Like, take someone who's been around the company 5, 6, 7 years, has shown a real penchant for a particular process to be an expert in it, seems to like that. Like, how do we retain the talent and do this? Because I agree with you. We have to have this. This is the one that I think is probably, out of all this whole list, is the most challenging to satisfy.
It's a great call out, Jim, in my opinion, for a lot of reasons. One being, if you look at careers in manufacturing and how those careers progress, I think a lot of people at times get stuck in that progression of their career. So in my experience, and I'm probably a little bit older than you, but,
Not much, but a little bit.
In my experience, you saw a lot more growth in peripheral organizations like IT or HR or accounting. Accounting's a big one, right? Or finance, if you want to call it finance.
Yeah.
But manufacturing, things moved slow because
painfully
we didn't want to move people that often. And a lot of times people who were critical in a manufacturing process, they were kind of, I don't want to say held back, but they were kind of encouraged to stay where they were, right? And their careers didn't grow as rapidly. Now,
I've got a young engineer right now I've been, kind of conversing back and forth with, and they're in that kind of that, they're about to get pigeonholed, or feel like they are, because they're very, very good and they have that ability to build that expertise, but don't necessarily feel the reward for that. Is that kind of where you're going? Like, you feel like you're getting held back and you're not really getting the reward. Like, there's no reward for just becoming an absolute expert or craftsman in a particular thing. There's no reward in that versus I jump companies or I take a promotion, even though maybe I'm a terrible people leader, but I'm really, really good technically, but there's no good path for me technically to continue to progress. Is that kind of where you're getting at?
That's exactly it, Jim. And there's one other dynamic there too that I think is very important. People change, family situations change, personal situations change.
100%.
I think about when I was younger and I had kids, I wanted to be where there were more opportunities for them. And sometimes that's not always in the middle of a small town,
Yeah.
right? And again, everyone's going to have their own personal opinions about that, but giving people options is good. Not feeling like you're always attached to a single location or a single process,
Right.
right? So some of it's career and career opportunity, and some of it's personal opportunity too. I just think it's something we need to call out.
I think that's going to be the big challenge in all this. I think having that expertise, because, well, and you're going to get into the next one, but even the expert systems and AI and machine learning. Well, if you don't know what good looks like, if someone doesn't know what good looks like, those things are pretty much worthless. So
Yeah,
so let's talk
it's
about
interesting.
so let's talk about
If you think about
the expert advisory systems, and then we'll talk about these two things together. I think because I
yeah,
think they go hand in hand.
one more point before we jump
Sure.
there, though, Jim.
Yep.
It's important, and that is if you think about data, where we started, the data building block, the data twin. It's technical, right?
Mhm.
How do we? There's some elements of process in there. How do we make the calculations? But
Right.
then you put it in place technically. The expert monitoring and support is very much about the people. Very much about the people.
100%.
So I wanted to call that out, and I think it's a good lead into your point. Now, if we go to expert systems, when our people recognize common issues, problems, opportunities, right, or scenarios, now they can, instead of just constantly monitoring and acting as the expert, they can actually start thinking about, hey, how do I apply digital tools, digital capabilities to this and build expert systems? Those expert systems can simply be prescriptive. Hey, I know when these things happen, an operator has to do something. That would be the prescriptive kind of model, where the expertise is coming more from an SME. But then there's the whole AI concept, right? And that is, even when we apply AI or want to apply AI, somebody's got to validate it. You need a subject matter expert
100%.
in place. So the idea of just saying, hey, we'll throw a bunch of our data in a system and it'll become the system expert, it's a bit misleading, right? So
a bit. It's
whenever
a lot misleading, but yet that's how it's sold a lot of times.
I know.
I
Whenever
literally
you
told a
talk
customer 2 weeks ago, if somebody comes in and tells you that, they're lying.
Exactly. Whenever you talk about expert monitoring and support, that can lead to expert systems. But to your point about them going hand in hand, you're exactly right. And it really takes an SME to know, again, what good looks like, what works, what doesn't work, what's logical, what isn't. It doesn't mean AI can't be valuable. I'm not saying that. It can
I'm
be
not either.
incredibly valuable.
100%.
But it's got to be done within at least some oversight and expert knowledge in partnership with the AI.
And I think that's where, again, this is going to be the challenge for most companies, is keeping enough of that expertise around and giving them enough time to back out of the firefighting mode to build the expert systems. Because right now, some of the companies we work with, if we go try to find the experts on the process, it's really hard to get any of their time. It's really tough.
Agree.
And
how can I help you on long-term problem solving, long-term opportunities when I've got so many fires to fight?
And I'm always, selling the fact that I feel like we can keep the fires from popping back up if we can just have a little of your time. And they're like, but I can't give you any time because I'm too busy. And it's like, well, you're going to be perpetually stuck unless you figure out a way to carve this out. And we just have to do it a piece at a time. But I think these two things right here are really, really, really key. And they're going to be a massive challenge as time goes on. Massive challenge.
Yeah, but I think they're the heart and soul, along with the data. They're the heart and soul of this
100%.
concept of remote operations. Now, there are a few other things we should call out. I don't want to ignore them.
Yep.
One is, knowledge development and rapid transfer. It's kind of this idea of
Yep.
training, simulation training. And all these things are done in partnership with the plant, right? In partnership with that factory of the future, right? But how do we more quickly transfer knowledge, more quickly train, more quickly make people capable of the experience they're going to get in the plant? So this whole idea of knowledge management, simulation, that's part of this as well. And I wanted to make sure we called that out. So
For sure.
we should expect to see more turnover in the future, more turnover of employees. And it's going to be more important than ever to bring them up to speed quickly, to be able to transfer knowledge quickly. So that's a
Agreed.
part of this picture.
Agreed.
And then the fifth one, I went third. The fifth one that we can't ignore is the ability to problem solve and innovate. And, the first question I always ask is, whose job is that? And just like safety, innovation, problem solving and innovation is everyone's job.
Yeah.
But when you have good data, when you have good collaboration between, fleet-wide experts and site experts, you now have a platform for innovation. And I think that comes out of all of this as another added benefit when we've done several of those building blocks very well. This is another one you can add to the bucket, because you now have a platform that you can use to take next steps to further drive continuous improvement like you've never done before. So I will add that as an additional building block to this remote operations concept.
So out of all the ones we've talked about, so we've talked about 5 under, this remote operations capability. We talked about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 under the factory of the future will look like. Are these things that you need to do in a particular order, or are these things that you do a little bit of everything? Like, how do you go about, like, what's first, second, third? Like, how do you identify that?
That's a great question. So I'm going to answer it in this way. It can vary depending on the type of process you're supporting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by type of process is primarily continuous, batch, discrete, right? Discrete is going to have a very high content of physical labor by nature, right? So there may be more of an emphasis on physical task automation there, whereas continuous might be more focused on advanced process control. So I think you got to look at the type of process you're supporting.
Yep.
As you're thinking about prioritizing. That's one. But there are some common themes, and I'm bringing this up for a reason. Data is absolutely a common theme.
Yeah.
So that data building block, the problem with it is sometimes it's hard to tie direct value to, but I'm going to tell you almost have to start with some element of data. And, sometimes people cringe because the returns aren't as quick. To your point, if you can't get that foundation laid right, you're just chasing your tail. You're just going to wind up chasing your tail and running in circles. So data's, I think, has to be up near the top of the list.
Yeah. We have a thing we're chasing right now. So to tie that together, the expertise at the plants, it's reasonably good, but not, because it's a fairly small manufacturer, that maybe not at the level of some of the larger manufacturers. And so they're relying on some outside vendors for help in this particular area. But so we're trying to assist as well using some of the machine learning and other tools. Their data quality is just not good enough. Like, we just can't. Like, the instrumentation hasn't worked, or it doesn't work, or it worked for a while and now it doesn't, or it did, or it didn't work and now it does. And so, like, you can't really, like, they have a seasonal problem, right? These things happen, things get worse. Some things get worse in the winter, and the opposite thing gets better. And then they flip in the summertime, and they're like, why does this happen? We should be fairly consistent, and it's like it just swings. And that data foundation that's so key that could potentially help us give them some clues, it keeps striking out because their data quality is bad. So yeah, data, and that gets overlooked, and that's why we've done the data fidelity service studies, and we focus a lot on data quality because every time we get into some of those kind of projects, we've been hamstrung when the data's not good. So, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm gonna. You asked a specific question, and so I'm going to try to answer you a little bit more specifically than I did. Data is always at the forefront.
Right.
You got to have a data focus. After that, there is some dependence on the type of process you're supporting.
Makes sense.
Then naturally, I think there are some things that come later, maybe like the innovation platform, maybe some of the knowledge transfer and training. I would probably put the operator experience and the supervisor experience somewhere in the middle of all of that as well. So it's really hard to say exactly where you should prioritize. I know data will be one. The rest is going to depend on, again, the type of process you support and your culture as a company.
Yeah.
But I think there'll be different answers.
So there's no one size fits all here. It's not like, that's what I was thinking too, but I just wanted, because you've worked in different industries and worked with a lot of different companies, you would probably give, depending on where people are at and what type of processes they have, you'd probably give them a different answer on where to start.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Agreed. And what are their priorities as a company as well? I think, that will feed into this.
Makes sense.
So finally, the third transformation theme is this whole idea of digital supply chain. So I want to start here and say that whole data focus that we saw in remote operations concepts, how we roll up data, that's an important part of this transformation theme as well.
100%,
in deciding where to put it, we put it in remote operations, but it really has to connect all these transformation themes. And why I'm calling it out here and now is I want to highlight a point. In most cases in the world of manufacturing, your world is real-time. Real-time control, real-time monitoring, real-time decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it from a business perspective, it's very much more transactional in nature. Now, you do have some time elements like monthly, daily, weekly, monthly, right? And I'll say daily, weekly, monthly, because sometimes, you might have procurement data that you want to look at daily. You might have energy data you might want to look at energy data you might want to look at daily from a business perspective, right? You might want to have a financial data you look at weekly, monthly, sometimes even daily, right?
Right.
So our business world lives in that, I believe, the daily, weekly, monthly world.
Mm-hmm.
Our operations and manufacturing live pretty close to real time, but they have to integrate. And most of the time when we talk about digital supply chain, what we're talking about is some set of summary data that needs to work with all the business data, whether that be a batch summary, a production summary, whether it be a shift summary, a daily summary, a volume summary, right? And
lot summary, yeah.
Lot summary, KPI summary, right? That data's got to roll up to the business level. I'm calling that out here because what we've talked about in the factory of the future, in the remote operation concepts, we've talked near real time. But that same data foundation has to also meet these business needs. So I'm calling it out. You got to roll data up, get it into daily, weekly, monthly format, so it can be analyzed with all the data from the business. Okay? That's a key need in support of digital supply chain.
Yep.
Okay? Now, what are the types of things I would expect companies to be doing around digital supply chain? The first thing, and probably the simplest, is just real-time visibility into supply and production, right? More and more customers are expecting that, right? What's available off the shelf now?
Right.
Is my monthly recurring order at risk because there are pinches in the supply chain? Is that having a cost impact? Customers are going to care about this.
Right.
They want really good visibility across the supply chain. That's the simplest building block, I think, within digital supply chain.
Yep.
Okay. Then there's some other things, and so that one's more about the customer, the supplier, the manufacturer, the customer, end to end. Then there are things companies will even want to do internally, and an example there is manufacturing cost accounting.
Yep.
Right? So in most cases, your customers are really going to care about things like um, supply, quality, orders. They're going to care about that. Now they're going to care about cost from a standpoint of, you know, how it's hitting their bottom line.
Right.
They aren't going to care about cost in regard to how it's hitting the manufacturer's bottom line.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
You know, that's really beyond their level of concern, I would say. However, well, that's a little bit misleading because obviously they want their partners to become long-term sustainable partners, and they're not going to want them to go away tomorrow. But
right.
you understand what I'm saying?
Yep. Yep.
However, inside a company, and I've lived inside of companies for a long time, there's a lot of concern about, hey, almost daily P&L. How did I do in that production run? How did I do in that batch run? You know, they care about that. And can I get that closer to real time? So that's a piece of this picture as well. When we talk about supply chain, it's not only about the things we do from supplier to customer. Internally within a company, we do care how we do lot by lot, batch by batch. We do care how we do shift by shift. And having that visibility, and not only in regard to how we need to perform better, but also in regard to how we may need to go back to our customers and change some of our conversations, right? Mm-hmm. Because in some cases you can be performing very well, but maybe quality suffered in the supply chain. And as a result of that, you might have to increase costs, right? So anyway, a lot of discussion around the internal data needs.
Yeah, we've actually had a couple of manufacturing cost accounting discussions in the last couple of months, you know, where people want to get a better handle more real time. You know, don't wait for the end of the month to figure out how we did. Exactly. You know, they want to know, I mean, I guess we're, June 20th, you know, like, got 10 days left in the month. Is there something I can do to change course to still finish on target? You know, I don't
Daily P&L will be a real thing.
Yeah,
I promise, as we get better at data, it'll be a real thing.
For sure.
How do we do every day, and how do we adjust to hit our month-end targets?
Yeah.
Right? Because you know, you've made commitments. You want to live to your commitments, and the more you can make adjustments on a daily basis to meet those commitments, I think the better chance you'll have.
We actually did something, and this was a couple years ago for a customer, and I think they're still using it. So they have like a sales and operating plan. You know, this is how much we expect to produce in each of our areas in our plant. And then they have like the design capacity and then their record day. And so based on their S&OP and where they're at right now, and based on what their design capacities or their record days been, can they still hit the sales and operating plan? Yes or no?
Yeah.
And so we actually have that running as a PI analytic. Is S&OP still attainable?
Yeah.
You know, and then even like, okay,
that's a reasonable ask.
How much do you need to produce every day to hit that? You know, and you know, compared to what you've been producing, right? It's fairly simple. Like once you have the data, you know, it's a fairly simple metric. So.
Yep, completely agree. Okay, the third one I'll talk about, and it goes beyond just data visibility, but it's around manufacturing traceability. And this can be so many things. When I say manufacturing traceability, inevitably someone's going to think about quality traceability, and that's absolutely one of the components. But it can be sustainability reporting. It can be energy reporting, kind of related to sustainability. It can be, you know, part of traceability, but was it locally sourced, right? These are the things our customers are going to want to know. And so will the communities we operate in, right? They'll want to know. So that whole landscape is changing. And this isn't something they're asking companies to do, manufacturers to do. They're demanding it. look at, I will have traceability data. I will know how you're impacting the environment. So I think industry as a whole has got to get a lot better at this. And
Yeah,
by the way, that requires pretty granular data
it does.
all the way down to the shop floor. So look, I think it's an important one. A lot of work needs to be done, but you can't wait to get started on that journey because it's going to take time to get better and to meet expectations in that pursuit.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
And then the final one I'll bring up, and it's one I didn't note, Jim, but I want to
That's
bring
fine.
this up, is market insights, right? I
Yeah.
know at the large companies I've worked for, we're almost being asked by some of our customers, what do we see happening, right? What are the macro trends across our customer base, across our supplier base, and how can we become more anticipatory related to that? So that's another building block I think in this
Especially
transformation.
especially right now because we've had so much volatility, in the last 3 or 4 years. Right? We had this, COVID that locked everything down. Like none of us saw that coming. Right? And then, government's handing out a bunch of free money, so everything booms. Right? People are out spending money like crazy. Nobody can build anything fast enough. And now we've had a little bit of a retraction in that. Right? And I think some companies are feeling that and seeing that. Um, yeah. So how do you see that sooner, and how do you react to it quicker?
And don't forget the labor side of that either. That's another big one. It's related to COVID, but I don't think COVID caused it. I think COVID accelerated it. But the impact of available labor
Oh yeah.
on the supply chain is a huge one.
Yeah. No.
And
I still
you
don't know
know,
where everybody went, but I do know a bunch of people retired. A bunch of people took their toys and went home and said, "Okay, I think I'm done." Some people we were working with that we really respected, packed their toys and left. And but I think labor is a big one, and all the things we're talking about, labor and people. I don't care how good the technology is. If you don't have good labor and good people to provide the labor, you're gonna really struggle. I don't care how good
and
the technology is.
it's a changing game. I mean, it's not the same market that existed 20 years ago for labor.
Not at all.
And I think in some ways, a lot of companies are closing their eyes and hoping that goes away. I don't think it's
It's
going
not.
to. And they're going to have to get really innovative about how they attract and retain labor and how they address some of the high need for labor, which is everything we're talking about here. So,
It's gonna be hard. Yeah. Yeah. You can't do the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil when it comes to labor. You've got to go out and attack it. Just like I said, maybe some of these plants are gonna have to go to their community colleges and say, hey, look, this particular segment, is kind of going away. We need to figure out or maybe repurpose some of these people, into a higher, technical field, E&I or something along those lines. I mean, I think companies are going to have to come up with their own supply chain of people, of skilled labor. Otherwise,
yeah,
we're going to all
they're going
struggle.
to they're going to have to make the shop floor attractive again. I think 20
Yeah.
years ago, the reason the shop floor was attractive was the pay scale, right? For a lot of labor, it was the pay scale. I think now the way things are evolving, that's not a differentiator. It's not the same differentiator it was.
No.
So how are you going to want to make people come into manufacturing?
Oh,
And it's about contribution. It's about job experience. It's about ownership, the skills they develop. I mean, it's got to change from what it used to be.
yeah. And think about right now, if you're a good E&I or maintenance mechanic, I mean, they're probably working you to death because you're one of the few.
I think it's true.
You
I
know.
think it's true because it's kind of a sidebar focus, right? It's not core process. It's kind of a sidebar, and it's needed, but it's not a a priority focus where we're going to go out and higher priority resources to support. So you kind of, to your point earlier, I think, Jim, it's one of those jobs that isn't always appreciated like it should be. So that's part of what has to change, right?
Yeah.
As we think about the workforce of tomorrow.
I mean, the real typical blue collar type people that we've always kind of thought about, the operators, the E&I maintenance people, and the operations supervisors, which they're kind of white collar, pseudo white collar, but most of them came up through the ranks. That's where I think a lot of companies need to focus better, better relations with them and taking some load off of them. I think they've dumped so much on them.
Agreed.
You know,
I agree.
and I think too, they've tried to dumb down the operators. You just do what you're told. We could put a trained monkey in your seat, which isn't true, but that's how they're made to feel. So they don't want to make a decision. They're like, all right, you make the call. I don't. You told me not to do anything. And I think there's just a whole lot of things that have to change in that. Everyone in that blue collar arena has to get smarter and more appreciated.
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean,
I think that's the key to all of
you
this.
said it earlier. You said it earlier. A lot of times initiatives come from above, and I think into this operations of the future or workplace of tomorrow, the most important person is the operator and the supervisor.
I think so too.
Right? And they have to be treated more like that. They're not treated like that today. They have to start being treated more like that.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, Jim, I know we're about to wrap up.
Yep.
Again, we talked about big picture and this idea of transformation themes. I think there's three key focus areas.
Yep.
The factory of the future, remote operations concepts, and the digital supply chain. I think they are the long-term objectives we have to keep our eye on the ball.
Yep.
But we have to go after them with a focus on building blocks, strategic and foundational building blocks, knowing that those little changes within each of those building blocks will eventually enable big step changes. Those big step changes are the transformation. But you got to keep the storyline connected, and you got to keep your eye on the ball throughout the journey to make sure you're accomplishing the goals you set as a manufacturing organization.
I think that was the biggest thing I've learned is just that, probably because I've never been in some of the roles you've been in, director, VP level type roles where you had to kind of step back and think about, okay, how am I going to accomplish this big thing? How do I keep the main thing, as people would always say. I guess I hadn't really thought of that enough, and I hope whoever's listening to this takes that out of this call, because to me, that's probably, that and our labor issues are probably the two biggest lessons. I think is we have to have a long-term vision with all these little projects we're working on, and we have to focus on people.
Yeah, you can't let your industrial transformation, your manufacturing transformation be defined by 5,000 projects.
Yeah.
Because then you lose all clarity of what you're trying to accomplish and where you're trying to go. It's got to be a connected journey, a connected storyline. That's what we tried to lay out today, and hopefully that resonated well with the audience.
Hope so. Well, thanks for chatting. So, quick preview of part 3 and final part of this particular talk.
Yeah, so part 3 will be a focus on how do we start thinking about the technology architecture as a whole so that we aren't building it piece by piece.
Yep.
And maybe an analogy to think about as we get that conversation started. Can you imagine if you lived in a home, Jim, and every time you bought something that had to have electricity in that home, you then decided, well, now we'll put in an outlet.
Yeah.
Okay? That's the way we're handling a lot of these projects, is we're building a new outlet every time we want to accomplish
Very true.
something new or deliver a new project. We're building a new outlet. And we got to step back away from that and say, how do we build an infrastructure, a digital infrastructure we can plug parts and pieces into that'll function and operate well without reinventing or inventing a independent or disconnected pipeline. So we're going to talk about that broad architecture concept and where the technology has to go to meet the needs we've identified up until now.
Sounds great. Looking forward to that. So anyway, thanks for joining us. If you're watching on YouTube, give me a like and a subscribe. That'd be great. Connect with Lance on LinkedIn. He's full of wisdom, in case you haven't figured that out by now. And I hope you guys enjoyed this talk. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jim.